He didn't find a stray calf in the hay behind the trading post. He found a girl in chains. And the moment he cut her loose, he bound himself to a war no man could outrun. The late afternoon sun hung low and angry over Sutter's Post, a weather-beaten outpost where whiskey cost less than water and men traded bullets before words. The air was dry as ash, heavy with the stench of horses and old blood. Elias Turner had no business here, not anymore. He'd come only for salt, a length of rope, and to water his old dog Rex before riding back into silence. But as he led his horse around the back of the post, he heard it. A faint rustle, then a sound so quiet it could have been mistaken for wind through straw. Rex froze, ears twitching. Then came the whisper. A voice. Human. Fractured. Help. Elias drew his knife by instinct. He stepped carefully past a collapsed feed barrel and kicked open a splintered gate. There, half buried in moldy hay and filth, lay a girl no older than 14. Her skin was sun-darkened, her lips cracked and dry. One wrist was chained to a rotting fence post with rusted iron, the metal biting deep into flesh that had long since stopped bleeding. She didn't beg, she didn't flinch. She just looked up at him with eyes too steady for her age, as if being shackled like livestock wasn't new to her. Elias didn't speak. He knelt, cut the chain with 2 swift strikes of his hunting knife, and caught her as she collapsed into his arms like a bundle of wet burlap. From that moment, the dust on his boots would no longer belong to just his own path. And somewhere beyond the horizon, men with guns were already following her scent. Men who would gladly burn his land to the ground just to put the chains back on. He said nothing as he cradled her weight. The girl was light as smoke, her breath shallow but there. His horse snorted uneasily behind him, sensing something in the air that Elias already knew in his gut. This wasn't mercy. This was consequence.
Elias Turner was not a man given to second chances. Gray at the temples, sunburned along the lines where a hat never sat quite right, he'd spent the last 7 years letting fences rot and windows go dark. Rex was his only companion, and even the dog had more scars than most men in town. But today, Elias didn't walk away. He carried her past the trading post's back wall, past barrels of gunpowder and crates of tanned hides, past the shouting of merchants who didn't notice or didn't care. No one saw. Or maybe they did and chose to forget. And as he laid her gently across his saddle, something cracked inside him. Not loudly, just enough to let the wind in. The ride back to Elias's ranch was long, quiet, and steeped in heat. The girl didn't speak, didn't stir. Now and then her body would twitch from exhaustion or fever, but her eyes remained shut, her breath shallow. She clung to the saddle horn like someone used to holding on to things that never held back. The wind kicked up little devils of dust across the flats, following them like ghosts. Elias rode steady, not looking back. He'd seen enough back there. Too much, maybe. By the time they reached the gate, the sun had dipped behind the hills, staining the sky in blood-orange streaks. His ranch, a lonely stretch of wood and dry earth framed by leaning fences and sagging eaves, waited like a tired old dog. No lights, no welcome, just silence and splinters. He didn't take her to the bunkhouse. He took her to the main house, to a room he hadn't stepped into in nearly 6 years. The mattress still held its shape. The blankets still smelled faintly of smoke and cedar. He laid her down as gently as he could, brushing straw and dirt from her brow. Her skin was warm, too warm. Rex sniffed the doorway and then sat beside it, quiet as a sentry. Elias knelt, pulled a basin from beneath the washstand, and fetched water from the rain barrel out back. When he returned, he cleaned her wrists first. They were torn raw, with iron-gray bruises beneath the cuts. Whoever had chained her didn't care if bone met metal. He cleaned her face next. Dirt caked along her jaw, blood dried along her hairline. She flinched at his touch but didn't wake. He removed his holster, hung it on the hook by the door. Then he unbuckled the knife from his boot and set it on the dresser. Small gestures, loud messages. Next came the fire. He lit a match, coaxed the hearth back to life, and watched as orange light filled the room. The shadows pulled back a little. So did his thoughts, until memory broke through. He was binding her wrist when his fingers froze. That skin, too thin, too tender, reminded him of another arm, smaller, burned, reaching for him through smoke. A boy's arm. A fire years ago. An accident, they said, but the truth was uglier. It was the night soldiers rode past his home without stopping, without asking. His wife was half Apache. That made the flames less urgent. His boy, he never made it out, not fully. Elias drew a breath through clenched teeth and shook the memory off like rain. He reached for a clean rag, dipped it, and wiped the girl's lips. When he reached her waist to check for other wounds, his hand brushed something under her torn belt. A pouch, leather, soft, stitched in the old way. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside lay a polished black stone, no bigger than a coin, etched with symbols he'd seen once in a graveyard up near the sacred ridge. A grave with no name, only markings. Tribal, ancient. He turned the stone in his palm. It was warm, too warm. There was something else in the pouch, a strip of rawhide with a brand burned into it. Not livestock, military. A quartermaster's seal. He looked from the stone to the girl. She was still asleep, still a child. But nothing about this was simple. Elias stepped back and sat on the edge of the bed, staring into the hearth. The fire cracked once, sharp as a rifle shot. What truth was she carrying, and how far were they willing to kill to bury it? If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. The morning broke without a bird in the sky. Elias was up before the sun, boots crunching frost-bitten dirt as he stepped off the porch. The girl, Shackled, he learned her name only once she murmured it in her sleep, was still resting, her breathing steadier now, though shallow. The stone and the branded strip remained on the dresser beside her, untouched since he set them there the night before. Rex limped beside him, sniffing the edge of the corral. The dog hadn't eaten since yesterday, neither had Elias. He scanned the horizon out of habit, eyes squinting against the pale blue. Then he saw it, barely more than a ripple at first. A line in the dust to the south. Too slow for cattle, too smooth for a wagon. Hoof prints, fresh, deep, made by shod horses. Elias knelt and pressed 2 fingers into one of the tracks. The edges still crumbled under his touch. Maybe an hour old, no more than 2. Someone had ridden up close enough to see the cabin, then turned around. No knock, no call, just observation. Rex growled, low and uneasy. That confirmed it. They were being watched. He stood, wiped the dust from his hands, and walked back to the cabin. Inside, the fire had dimmed to embers. Shackled stirred as he stepped in, her eyes opening to a sliver. "There were men," Elias said quietly. "Riders. You know who?" Her lips parted, cracked and dry, but a word still came through. Crow. That name hit him like a dropped hammer. Ezra Crow. Gun runner, land broker, sells rumors when bullets don't fetch enough. Last Elias heard, Crow had made himself a king of filth down at the trading post, greased every palm from Fort Carter to Tucson. And if Crow was sniffing around Elias's land, it wasn't curiosity, it was profit. "He wants what you carry," Elias said. "That stone?" Shackled didn't answer.
Her eyes drifted toward the dresser, then back to him. He understood. Crow wasn't just after the stone. He was after whatever she knew, whatever she was. Elias walked to the barn and grabbed what supplies he had left. Salt pork, dried beans, 3 canteens of water, a rifle he hadn't cleaned in a year. He checked the chamber. 3 rounds in the tube, 1 in the stock. Not enough. By mid-morning he heard it, a whistle. Not a bird's, a man's. Short, sharp, signal. Then the knock, polite, practiced. 2 taps, then silence. Elias stepped onto the porch. 3 riders waited by the gate. One of them was Ezra Crow, looking like the desert had tried to kill him and failed out of disgust. His hat was too clean, boots too shiny, and his grin too wide. "Well now," Crow said, lifting a hand as if greeting an old friend. "Ain't this a quiet little corner of the world? You always keep company with fugitives, Turner?" "I keep to myself." "Not lately, you don't." The other 2 men weren't talking. One carried a lever-action rifle across his lap. The other a shotgun, hanging casual by his side. "We got word from Fort Carter," Crow continued. "Girl you got, she's wanted. Murder, espionage, you name it. Real dangerous type." "She's a kid." Crow chuckled. "Yeah, and that rock she carries is just a lucky charm, right? You think I don't know what she's worth? Hell, you probably don't either." Elias didn't move. His eyes flicked once toward the barn, then to the corral, calculating. "You can walk away," Crow offered. "Hand her over. Nobody gets hurt. Hell, I'll even throw in a bag of flour." Elias didn't answer, just slowly reached into his coat and tossed a bullet onto the porch boards. Crow's grin faded. "You sure you want to start this?" "No," Elias said, "but I damn sure know how to finish it." Crow leaned in his saddle, then spat. "Suit yourself." The 3 men turned, rode off. No threats, no raised voices, but Elias knew what it meant. This wasn't a warning. It was a countdown. Elias waited until the dust from Crow's horses settled into the wind before going back inside. The door creaked on swollen hinges. Sahale was sitting up now, back against the wall, arms wrapped tight around her knees. She was awake, truly awake this time, and watching him like a fox in a snare. "I know who he is," Elias said. "Crow. I know what he does." She didn't answer. He sat down on the edge of the chair, pulled the battered tin kettle closer to the fire, and poured water into 2 cups. One for him, one he left on the floor by her side. After a long pause, she reached for it with both hands, fingers trembling. "Why's he after you?" Sahale sipped, then stared at the flames. Her voice was thin but steady. "Because I carry what his friends want, and I don't forget." Elias leaned forward. "That stone, what is it?" Her eyes flicked toward the dresser where the black stone rested in its pouch. She didn't speak right away. When she did, her words came slow, like someone reciting something sacred. "It's not just a symbol. It's the earth stone, one of 2. It holds the mark of the sacred valley, where our ancestors hid what could keep the peace or end every tribe that remains." Elias narrowed his gaze. A weapon? A choice. That word hung in the room like smoke. Sahale pulled her knees tighter. "My uncle died protecting it. They tortured him, thought he had both stones. But he only had the one. The other," she looked down at herself, "it was meant for me." Elias exhaled slowly, his boots scraping against the wood. "And Fort Carter. They sent men to buy it, then more men when we said no, then soldiers, and then fire." She didn't have to describe it. Elias had seen that kind of fire before, the kind that didn't care what it burned, the kind that erased. "I ran," she continued, They caught me once, traded me to Crow like I was a coin purse. He didn't know what I had."
Not then. Elias looked at the girl across the room, at her torn clothes, her bruised face, and the quiet weight she carried like someone far older. Not a fugitive, a key. What's in that valley? She looked up at him now. Proof that our land was never given away, that the treaties they broke still live in stone and blood. If the stone is united and read by someone not of any tribe, it becomes binding again, even in your courts. That stopped Elias cold. It wasn't myth, it was leverage, legal leverage, dangerous leverage. "Crow wants to sell it to the railroad," she said. "He doesn't care what happens after. And the army, they want it buried." Elias stood slowly, walking to the dresser. He lifted the pouch, took the stone in his hand again. It pulsed warm in his palm, alive somehow. "What do you need from me?" he asked, without looking at her. Sahel's voice cracked just slightly. "I need time to heal, and then I need to find the second stone." Elias turned. "And where is it?" She met his eyes. "With the man who signed the order to kill my uncle." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind picked up. The old shutters groaned. Inside, the fire hissed as a log split in the heat. Elias set the stone down gently, like a sleeping thing, and looked once more at the girl who'd been chained like an animal. Crow wanted to sell her. The army wanted to silence her. But she wanted justice. And God help him, Elias Turner was starting to want it too. The next morning came with silence. Not the peaceful kind. This was the kind that made your bones hum. Elias stood at the edge of his porch, a steaming tin cup in one hand, the rifle slung over his shoulder for the first time in months. He hadn't slept, not really. The girl, Sahel, was still resting, but the fever had broken. Her skin was cooler, her breathing deeper. Her words still echoed in his skull. A choice, she'd called the stone. Not a weapon, not a curse. A choice that had to be made by someone like him. Someone not Apache, not military. Someone with nothing left to lose. Rex barked once, sharper than usual. Elias turned. The old mutt was standing by the fence line, teeth bare, growling. Dust moved beyond the rise. Riders. They weren't trying to hide this time. 4 of them, Crow's men, spaced out like hounds closing in on a rabbit. The one on the left had a long coat that didn't quite hide the Winchester on his back. The one on the right carried a sawed-off shotgun too openly to be polite. The others, Elias didn't know their names, didn't need to. He stepped off the porch and whistled. Rex fell silent but didn't move. When the men reached the gate, they didn't bother dismounting. Crow wasn't among them, but his stink was. The lead rider grinned, a gold tooth flashing behind a cracked lip. "Boss says time's up. He's being generous, Turner. Don't make him regret it." Elias didn't answer, just stared. "You got until sundown," the rider continued. "Bring her back to the post. If she's not breathing, fine. If she is, better." He laughed. "Makes for a cleaner sail." Elias took a slow sip of coffee, then said, "You boys come back tonight, you best bring more than 4 horses and an attitude." The man's smile twitched. "We'll bring fire." They turned and rode off, but not fast, not like men afraid. Like men sure the game was already won. Elias waited until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he exhaled, long and low. That was a warning. The next one would be fire. Back inside, Sahal was awake. Sitting at the table now, blanket over her shoulders,
hands wrapped around the cup Elias had left for her. "They're coming," he said. She nodded. "I know that, too." He looked at her for a long moment. "You ever fired a rifle?" Her eyes flicked up. "I've never needed to." "Tonight," Elias said, "you might." He went to work without another word.
The windows were covered with burlap and nailed shut from the inside. The front gate was dragged closed and barred with 2 beams and a rusted chain. He took sacks of grain, split them, and stacked them behind the low walls of the porch to act as cover. Every nail he drove, every board he braced, told him one thing. This wasn't just defense. It was confession. He was choosing her. Sahale helped where she could, quietly, without complaint. She wrapped bandages, boiled water, moved supplies. By midday, the ranch no longer looked like a home. It looked like a last stand. At dusk, Elias stood on the roof with the spyglass. He swept the horizon once, twice. Then he saw it. A spark. Then another. Torches, dozens of them, rising over the ridge like fireflies with hate behind their wings. They weren't riding fast. They didn't need to. They thought this would be easy. Elias Turner lowered the glass, spit once into the dirt, then whispered to no one, "Let's see how easy it feels when they bleed." The torches didn't come closer that night. They sat like fireflies pinned to the distant hills, glowing reminders that someone out there had already written the ending to this story. They just hadn't delivered it yet. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with pine smoke and unspoken thoughts. Elias sat at the kitchen table, gun oil staining his fingers, cleaning a rifle that had once belonged to his father. Sahale moved with quiet purpose, checking the makeshift barricade across the front door, then returning to her corner, where the stone sat wrapped in deerskin on the table. "Do you think they'll come at dawn?" she asked, not looking up. "No," Elias said. "Crow's not one for early mornings. He's the kind who likes to watch people sweat before they burn." She nodded, slowly, as if confirming something she already knew. Then she picked up the stone. The glow from the hearth caught its surface, and for a second, Elias could have sworn the symbols shifted, just slightly. "You ever wonder," she said, "if this was meant for someone better?" Elias didn't answer right away. He finished assembling the rifle, pulled the lever to check the chamber, then leaned it against the wall. "All the time," he said. She glanced up. And I stopped waiting for someone better." That made her smile, but only for a breath. "I wasn't supposed to be the one carrying it," she said. "It was meant for my mother. She died in the fire when Fort Carter came. She never gave up the valley's location, no matter what they did to her." Elias looked at her hands. Steady now, no tremble. The bruises were fading, but the resolve beneath them had only sharpened. "She taught me how to lie," Sahale added, "how to survive, how to make people believe I was too weak to know anything." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You played me?" "I had to." "Did it work?" Her smile returned, this time a little stronger. "You're still here, aren't you?" He let out a quiet chuckle, more breath than sound. "Yeah, guess I am." She stood and walked to the window, pushing back the burlap just enough to peer through a crack. Outside, the torches still glowed like evil stars. "I never wanted to be part of any prophecy," she said. "I just wanted to stop running." Elias joined her, his eyes following the line of fire across the ridge. "You picked the wrong ranch for that," he muttered. Silence fell between them, but it wasn't cold. It was the kind of silence shared by people who know what's coming and have already made their peace with it. Then Sahale reached into the pocket of her tattered skirt and pulled out something small, an old piece of hide, etched with lines and shapes. A map, or at least part of one. She handed it to Elias without a word. He studied it. Some of the lines matched terrain he recognized.
the canyons west of Dry River, the curve of the cliffs near Devil's Rest. But one mark near the center glowed faintly under the firelight. "That symbol," he said.
"I've seen it before." She turned to him. "Where?" He looked away for a second, then back. "On a headstone, near the old mission where I buried my boy." Sahel's eyes widened. "Your son?" Elias didn't speak for a while, just nodded. She looked at the map again, then at him. "That place, it might be where the second stone is hidden." He rubbed his jaw. "Then we've got more than Crow to worry about." Sahel's expression darkened. "Fort Carter." "Exactly." He rolled up the map, tucked it carefully beside the stone, then walked to the door and checked the lock again. The boards were still holding, for now. "You believe in fate?" she asked quietly. Elias didn't turn. "No." "Then why are you helping me?" He paused, hand on the latch, then finally said, "Because I know what it feels like to be left behind." And this time Sahel didn't smile. She just whispered, "So do I." The storm didn't break that night, but the air changed, the kind of change you feel in your bones before anything reaches your eyes. Elias didn't sleep, neither did Sahel. They kept a single lantern burning low between them, the map and the earthstone laid out on the table like pieces of something too big to name. Just before dawn, someone knocked. Not Crow's men, not Fort Carter, just one rider, old and hunched, wrapped in a coat that had seen 2 wars and too many lies. Elias opened the door with his hand near the rifle. It was Silas Merrick, doctor, former Union medic, a man Elias had once pulled from a ditch with a shattered leg and no horse left to ride. In return, Silas had brought Elias morphine, stories, and silence whenever silence was needed most. "Can I come in?" he asked, voice dry. "Depends," Elias replied. "You bring in trouble?" "Not if you listen fast." Elias stepped aside. Silas entered, tipping his hat at Sahel, who stayed seated with the stone half wrapped in her fingers. He didn't question it, just sat down and pulled a leather-bound folder from beneath his coat. "Official report," he said, "classified, meant for Fort Carter's eyes only. But the man they sent to deliver it, well, let's just say he got lost. I found this instead." He opened the folder. Inside were grainy sketches, typed memos, and a map that matched the one Sahal had given Elias, only older, more exact. Elias scanned the page. Words jumped out like gunfire. "Object of strategic value. Unrecovered secondary stone. Site inaccessible due to local treaty. Orders to contain and suppress indigenous testimony." "What is this?" Elias asked. "Proof," Silas replied. "The army knew. Not a rumor, not a story passed down around a fire. They knew that Sacred Valley was real, that the stones weren't myth, and they've been trying to erase that knowledge ever since." He tapped one memo. "Crow's been selling information to 2 buyers, the railroad company and an investor tied to the governor's office. If either one gets both stones, they'll redraw the territory lines. Apache land will vanish. No recourse, no appeal." Sahal leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "And if we get the second stone?" Silas met her eyes. "Then you've got the last unbroken clause in the Treaty of Mountain Fire. It was written by a federal judge, binding if both stones bear witness and a neutral party delivers it." Elias's voice was barely above a whisper. "Neutral party?" Silas nodded. "Someone like you, Eli. Someone not Apache, not Army, not bought." The room went silent. The fire popped. The wind scraped against the boards like something with claws. Then, without warning, Rex barked. 3 short bursts. A warning. Someone close.
Elias grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. Shapes in the distance. Men, but not Crow's gang. Bluecoats. "Fort Carter," Silas muttered. "They found me." "How many?" Elias counted. 8, maybe more. Sahah stood now, the earthstone clutched in one hand, the old map in the other. Her mouth was tight, calm.
"They're not here to talk," she said. "No," Elias agreed. "They're here to clean up." The door thudded with a sharp, commanding knock. Then a voice, young, clipped, practiced. "This is Lieutenant Harrow of Fort Carter. By order of the territorial governor, you are harboring a fugitive and stolen property. Open this door or we will breach." Sahale looked at Elias. "What do we do?" He didn't answer, not right away. He looked at the stone, at the map, at the girl who'd been chained behind a trading post like livestock, and now stood in front of a storm, with her spine straight as a rifle barrel. Then Elias opened the door. Just a crack, long enough to say, "You try steppin' over this threshold, son, you'll wish you were chasing ghosts instead." The door slammed shut again. From outside, orders barked, rifles cocked. Elias turned to Sahale. "We go tonight. If they want to bury the truth, we dig it out first." And from the firelight's edge, the earthstone pulsed. Not brighter, but deeper, as if it knew. The reckoning had begun. That night, Elias didn't sleep. He sat by the dying fire, the earthstone in his hand, the weight of a land's memory pressing against his skin like heat. Outside, the cavalry waited. Inside, the past breathed through the walls of a house that had once held a family. He thought of Martha, of his son, of the grave carved into rock above the dry wash, and the promise he never spoke aloud: never again. Come morning, Elias Turner would break into a military fort, steal a truth meant to stay buried, and dare the whole damn territory to stop him. They rode through the dark like shadows with purpose. Elias kept low in the saddle, his coat turned inside out to dull the color, his rifle strapped beneath the bedroll like a hunted man pretending to be a drifter. Sahale rode behind him on a pack mule, her frame cloaked in a dust-gray blanket, hair tucked up under a worn hat Elias had dug out of the barn. She hadn't spoken since they left the ranch. She didn't need to. They both knew what was waiting. Fort Carter sat on the edge of a bluff like a scar in the land. Timber walls 12 feet high, 4 watchtowers, 2 gates, and enough firepower to level a canyon. By dawn, the cavalry would be knocking on every door between Dustwater Crossing and Sutter's Post looking for them. They had one night, and one plan. "East slope," Elias whispered, pointing ahead. Sahal nodded. "That side's for supply wagons, less guards, I've seen it." They ditched the horses half a mile out, letting them roam free in the mesquite. Elias slung the rifle across his back and pulled the stolen uniform from Silas's saddlebag, an old cavalry coat, dirt-caked but real. Sahal slipped into a linen dress borrowed from a dead trader's kit. No insignia, just enough to pass. They walked the final stretch in silence, boots soft in the sand, breath tight in their lungs. At the gate, Elias knocked twice, firm and sharp. A young soldier opened the slit, scowling. "Orders?" Elias stepped forward, dropping his voice into the rough gravel he'd used back when men still mistook him for a scout. "Transfer from Colonel Hayes, escorting a witness, confidential." The soldier hesitated. "Your papers?" Elias pulled a folded sheet from his coat. Forged. A gamble. The boy looked at it, glanced at Sahal, then back at Elias. "You're late." "Story of my life," Elias muttered. The gate creaked open. Inside, Fort Carter was quieter than expected. Most of the men were at mess or tending gear, the early shift. Just a handful of guards near the perimeter. Sahal kept her head down, staying close.
They passed the blacksmith's shed, the barracks, and finally reached the command building, a two-story structure with lanterns burning behind drawn curtains. "That's where it'll be," she whispered, "the second stone." Elias nodded. Time to knock. They slipped around the back, where a servant's entrance hung half off its hinges.
Elias drew his knife, eased the door open, and stepped into the dark. Inside, the air smelled of ink and pipe smoke. Files lined the walls. One lantern burned low over a cluttered desk. They moved fast. Elias opened drawer after drawer while Sahale moved toward the safe behind the desk, a squat iron box bolted into the floor. She knelt, fingers running along the edges. "It's old," she said, "and loud." "You've done this before?" "No," she said, "but my uncle did." She pulled a thin wire from her braid and slid it into the lock, eyes half closed. Tick, click, pause, click. Then it opened. Inside sat a pouch nearly identical to hers, same stitching, same shape. But this one was heavier, older. She reached in and drew it out. The second earthstone. The moment it hit the air, both stones pulsed, together. But before Elias could speak, a voice rang from the hallway behind them. "Well, I'll be damned." They spun. Captain Bledsoe stood in the doorway, revolver in hand, shirt half-buttoned, mustache twitching with disdain. "I was wondering when you'd crawl out of your hole, Turner." Elias stepped in front of Sahale, eyes on the gun. "You don't have to do this." "Oh, but I do," Bledsoe said, "because what she carries, it's not just a rock, it's a fuse. And I've got orders to keep this fort from burning." He cocked the hammer, and the stone in Sahale's hands began to glow. For one breathless second, no one moved. Captain Bledsoe's revolver stayed leveled, steady as a railroad beam. Sahale's hands clutched the second earthstone, now glowing faintly, its warmth pulsing like a heart too long buried. Elias stood between them, palms half raised, gaze locked on the man whose uniform still bore the shine of Washington's favor. "You want the stone?" Elias said. "Then you're going to have to shoot her, right here, right now." Bledsoe's eyes narrowed. "Don't tempt me. She's just a girl. She's the last loose thread in a very expensive quilt." Sahale stepped forward. Her voice was steady. "You're not afraid of what I know. You're afraid of what I am." Bledsoe gave a humorless chuckle. "You think this is about you? No, sweetheart. This is about leverage, the kind men pay gold to keep quiet. And I'm the one who keeps it quiet." He took a step forward. "That thing in your hands, it proves there was a treaty, that the land we built this fort on ain't ours. If that goes public, if some damn judge in Santa Fe signs off, every railroad baron and army supplier west of the Mississippi loses their grip." "Then maybe they should," Elias growled. Bledsoe didn't flinch. "You think you're a hero, Turner? I read your file. Drifter, discharged, lost a wife and boy, never quite fit in again. So you built a fence and called it a life. You think saving one half-blood girl makes you clean?" Elias didn't move, didn't blink. "She's not the one who needs saving," he said. At that moment, a second voice rang out, from the open door behind Bledsoe. "Captain," it said, calm, older, sharp. Bledsoe turned. Colonel Ellison stood just outside the frame, flanked by two guards, his coat lined with dust, and his eyes far older than the lines in his face. "What in God's name is this?" Ellison asked, voice razor thin. Bledsoe faltered. "Sir, this is—" "Unauthorized retrieval? A potential murder? Or just your usual freelance execution?" Elias stepped aside, revealing the two stones, now glowing side by side on the desk. For a brief instant, the faint symbols etched on each mirrored one another, as if completing a puzzle neither had ever fully shown. Ellison approached, eyes fixed on the stones. "I've heard stories," he murmured. "Back during my campaign days, men talked about the Treaty of Mountain Fire like it was myth. But it's not, is it?" Sahale spoke. "No, sir. It's law, and we have both witnesses." Ellison nodded slowly. "And the delivery?" "Needs a neutral party," Elias said. "Someone the tribes trust."
Someone the courts won't reject. "And you think that's you?" "I don't care if it is," Elias said, "but it's not Bledsoe." Bledsoe hissed through his teeth. "Sir, with all due respect, this girl is a traitor. She fled custody. She killed a scout." "She didn't," Sahaleg interrupted, stepping forward. "He was paid by Ezra Crow to silence me. I have the letter." She reached into her cloak and pulled a weathered scrap of paper, blood-stained and folded tight. She handed it to Ellison, who read it silently. The colonel's face didn't change, but his order did. "Lieutenant Harrow," he called, "disarm the captain." Bledsoe's eyes went wide. "You can't!" The two guards moved in, prying the revolver from his hand. "You're relieved," Ellison said, "indefinitely." As Bledsoe was dragged out, he turned once toward Elias. "This isn't over." "No," Elias replied, "it's just beginning." The courtyard of Fort Carter had never been quieter. Colonel Ellison stood before the assembled men, 24 soldiers lined in formation, officers to his left, Elias and Sahale just behind. In the rising light, the earthstones sat on a cloth-covered crate like relics of a forgotten covenant, their glow now visible even beneath the clouds. "Bring them forward," Ellison ordered. 2 sergeants lifted the stones and placed them on a wooden stand between the flags of the Union and the territory of Arizona. Sahale stepped beside them, face still, hands steady. Ellison turned to the men. "Some of you may have heard whispers about treaties, about sacred objects, about a land once promised, then forgotten. I'm here to tell you those weren't whispers. They were warnings." He pointed to the stones. "These are the last witnesses of a binding agreement signed before any of us drew our first breath. The Treaty of Mountain Fire. Hidden, suppressed, but never undone." A low murmur ran through the crowd. Elias watched their faces. Confusion, curiosity, and in some, shame. He took a step forward.
"My name is Elias Turner. I'm no officer, no politician, just a rancher who buried his wife and his boy beneath a cottonwood tree. I never went looking for justice, but it found me, in the form of a girl in chains, a girl who held the key to a truth too dangerous to be believed." He nodded to Sahale. "She's not your enemy, she's your mirror. And if we don't look her in the eye, if we turn away again, then maybe we deserve what comes." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was loaded with choice. Then a gunshot cracked the air. A splinter of wood burst from the crate as a bullet slammed into its side. Chaos erupted, soldiers shouting, rifles raised. Elias spun, shielding Sahale. From the south wall, 3 riders had breached the gate. Ezra Crow at the front, teeth bared beneath a weather-beaten hat, 6-shooter in one hand, reins in the other. Behind him, 6 men on horseback, rifles drawn. "Move!" someone screamed. Ellison dropped to one knee beside the stones, pulling his saber. "Secure the witness." But Sahale was already running, toward the outer yard, where Crow had stopped cold in front of the stunned formation. Ezra dismounted, walking straight into the open, arms half raised, gun still visible. "You hand her over," he snarled, "or I burn this fort to the ground." Elias strode forward, stopping 10 paces from him. You're outnumbered, outgunned, out of time." Ezra laughed. "Don't need time, just one bullet." He cocked his pistol and pointed it at Sahale. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she raised both earthstones in her hands, and they lit. Brilliant, blinding, ancient. Symbols carved into the surface shimmered like fire made solid. The glow washed over the fort walls, over Crow's face, over the watching soldiers like a rising dawn from another world. Ezra stepped back, blinking. "What the hell?" "It's memory," Sahale said, "and it remembers every broken promise." Behind her, Ellison raised his voice over the hush. "Stand down, Crow, or face charges of treason, assault on federal property, and obstruction of tribal law." Ezra looked at the guns now aimed at him, from his own men, and he knew it was over. He dropped the pistol. Elias lowered his own weapon and stepped to Sahale's side. "What now?" he asked. She looked at the stones in her hands. "Now," she said, "we bring them home." By the time the sun broke fully over the hills, Fort Carter no longer belonged to silence. It belonged to judgment. Ezra Crow knelt in the dirt, wrists bound behind his back, flanked by 2 Union sergeants. His coat was torn, his face bloodied from a scuffle with one of his own men, the same man who had refused his order to fire on Sahale. Around them, soldiers moved like tides, resecuring the walls, gathering statements, posting orders. But the real weight hung over the center of the yard, where Colonel Ellison stood beside Elias, Sahale, and a visiting tribunal officer who'd been summoned at first light. The earthstones now rested on a velvet-lined case atop a field desk. The military photographer had just finished capturing them from 3 angles. 2 Apache elders had arrived hours earlier under white flag escort, their presence transforming the fort from a place of occupation to one of reluctant reconciliation. Ezra's head lolled back as he spat blood onto the ground. "You think this changes anything?" Elias stepped closer. "It already has." Ezra sneered. "You really believe they'll honor some dusty treaty written in a dead tongue? They'll bury it, stamp it with red wax, and call it a fairy tale." Sahale answered, not with fire, but clarity. "Not this time." She handed the translation scroll to the officer, its seal broken clean across the top. The officer read aloud. "The land of Sacred Valley, bordered by Red Rock Ridge and the Whispering Wash, shall remain under the spiritual and legal stewardship of the Apache, unmolested by settlers, merchants, or soldiers. Any violation shall be considered a breach of peace and dishonor upon the United States." Ezra laughed, hoarse and raw. "You're coding ghosts." Colonel Ellison raised an eyebrow. "Maybe. But those ghosts have teeth now, and Congress will listen, because this time there are witnesses and signatures and one hell of a story." He turned to the soldiers. "By my authority, I declare the Treaty of Mountain Fire not only valid, but currently binding. Fort Carter's expansion orders are hereby suspended. All military actions west of Dustwater Crossing will be reviewed, effective immediately." Murmurs rippled across the courtyard. Ezra's face twisted with fury. "You self-righteous cowards think you're heroes, but the moment this gets to Washington, they'll cut your funding, close your forts. You'll be ghosts too." "Maybe," Elias said quietly, "but I'd rather be a ghost with honor than a man who sells his soul to pave a railroad." Ellison looked to Sahale. "And you?" She nodded. "We return the stones to the valley, with or without you." Ellison gave the faintest smile. "You'll have escort and protection. The Army will honor the safe passage clause." She hesitated, then added, "And Ezra?"
The colonel turned to the officer. "He'll be transported to Santa Fe under federal custody, charged with conspiracy, obstruction, and attempted murder." Ezra snarled, "You're making a mistake." "No," Ellison said, "we're correcting one." As the wagon clattered away, carrying Ezra toward justice, or whatever shape it might take, Elias watched the dust settle behind it. He felt something shift, not loud, but real, like the turning of a page. Later that evening, he stood alone by the stones, laid out beneath a tent flap while the elders prepared for their return. Sahale approached, quiet as dusk. "He'll try again," she said. Elias nodded. "Then we'll be ready." She looked up at him. "Why'd you really come back to the fort?" He didn't answer right away. "Because this land's full of buried things, not just treaties, but people, promises, pain, and maybe some of them deserve to breathe again." She smiled. "Then we bring them home." Together, they covered the stones one last time. Tomorrow, they would ride into the sacred valley, not as fugitives, but as keepers of truth. 3 weeks later, the wind rolled soft over Dustwater Crossing. The town hadn't changed much. Same warped porches, same crooked sign over the saloon. But the air had shifted, like dust after rain. People looked up more, lingered longer in conversation, as if the silence that once choked these streets had finally let go. Elias rode in alone, Sahal following a few paces behind. They didn't say much, didn't need to. Word had traveled ahead of them, faster than mail, faster than riders. The Apache girl wasn't a thief. She was the witness. And Elias Turner, once the man folks barely remembered, was the one who'd brought the truth home. They passed the old trading post, boarded shut. No more chains, no more auctions, just peeling paint and a sun-bleached sign swinging aimlessly in the wind. A small notice had been tacked beside the door. Property under federal seizure, pending investigation. Outside the general store, Mr. Weber tipped his hat as they passed. Others followed, a slow nod from the barber, a murmured greeting from the stable hand. Elias didn't expect smiles. He didn't need them. What mattered was that no one turned away. At the town square, a temporary podium had been erected. Colonel Ellison stood beside a U.S. Marshal and 2 Apache representatives in ceremonial dress. The crowd was small but intent, store owners, ranchers, wives, children clutching their fathers' belts. Ellison's voice carried steady. "We gather today not to erase the past, but to acknowledge it. For too long, promises made were promises buried. But today, the Treaty of Mountain Fire is no longer forgotten." He gestured toward Sahal. "This young woman risked her life to protect the truth. She did not run, she endured. And she has shown more honor than many of us born under flags." A few scattered claps broke out, then more, then a tide. Elias didn't move. Not until a small hand tugged at his coat. He looked down. A young boy with dark braids stared up at him, eyes wide. "Is she really gonna fix the valley?" he asked. Elias bent to one knee. "She already did," he said. The boy nodded, then darted back to his mother. Sahal joined Elias at the edge of the square. She looked at the town, the people, the bare land beyond. "It's not forgiveness," she said, "but maybe it's the start of memory." Elias offered a faint smile. "Sometimes that's enough." As the flag was raised above the courthouse, the wind caught it, just enough to make it ripple, like a breath returned to something once thought dead. And Dustwater Crossing, for the first time in a long time, felt like a place worth staying in. The road back to Whisper Rock Ranch wasn't paved in glory. It was dirt and wind, bones of fence posts still leaning after last winter's storms, and the lowing of cattle scattered like ghosts across the range. But to Elias Turner, it had never looked more like home. Sahal rode beside him in silence, her braid trailing down the back of Elias's old wool jacket.
She wore it like armor now, not to hide, but to belong. And Elias had stopped thinking of it as his. Somewhere along the trail back, it had become hers too. The gate creaked open, same as always. Rex came bounding from the porch, tail a blur, barking his hoarse welcome. The house still leaned into the wind the way it always had, stubborn and scarred. But now there were footprints beside Elias's in the dirt. A second shadow moving just behind him, not trailing, but walking alongside. Inside, the hearth was cold, but not for long.
Sahale moved with quiet familiarity, dropping her satchel, checking the kettle, folding up her blanket from where it had been left on the chair. Elias couldn't speak, just watched as she tended to small things. He stepped out back and stared across the dry wash. Beyond it, beneath a gnarled cottonwood tree, was the grave of a boy who'd once ridden on his shoulders, who'd chased prairie dogs with a stick and asked too many questions about the stars. Elias knelt beside the stone, brushing off the dust. "We brought the stones back," he said softly, "and maybe more than that." A pause. "She's not your sister, but she's something close." When he stood, Sahale was behind him, watching. She didn't ask what he said. She didn't need to. Instead, she pointed to the ridge. "There," she said, "that's where the valley begins." Elias followed her gaze. "I know," he replied. "It's where I scattered Martha's ashes." Sahale nodded. "Then that's where we build." He blinked. "Build?" She gave a half smile. "You said this land deserved to breathe again, so let's give it lungs." The next morning they started small, mending fences, rehanging the barn door, letting the cattle out early. Elias showed her how to check the well. She taught him a song from her grandfather's tongue, meant to keep the hawks away from the chickens. There were no grand declarations, no plans carved in stone. But with every shared silence and every meal eaten from the same chipped plates, the ranch began to change. Not because it looked different, but because it finally held two people who had stopped running. The days ran quiet after that. The valley below turned green in places it hadn't for years. Whisper Rock Ranch, once a place of silence and ghosts, now held laughter, firelight, and the soft rhythm of two souls rebuilding something old into something whole. One evening, Elias sat alone by the porch, watching the stars rise over the ridge. In his hand was a silver medallion, once meant for a son who never came back from fever. Now it dangled between his fingers like a question long unspoken. He looked out toward the east, where the sacred valley lay beyond the ridgeline. "Some truths take a long time to reach the surface," he murmured. "But when they do, they don't come quietly. They come like thunder." Behind him, Sahale swept open the door and set down 2 mugs of coffee on the rail. She didn't say anything, just sat beside him. 2 silhouettes in the dusk. Not father and daughter, not rancher and guest, but something new, something stronger. The earth stones had been returned, the treaty honored, Ezra locked away. But the real victory wasn't written in federal records or tribal scrolls. It was here, in the way the land breathed again. In the way Elias looked at tomorrow, not with regret, but with quiet hope. Sometimes the West didn't need gunfire to change history. Sometimes it just needed one man to stop turning away. Have you ever watched something wrong unfold and wondered, if you'd had the courage, would you have done something? Have you ever carried a truth no one else believed? Maybe you have. And maybe that's why this story matters. Because it reminds us justice isn't always loud. Heroes don't always wear badges. And the most powerful revolutions start in silence, with a choice no one else sees. If this story stirred something in you, don't let it end here. Leave a comment. Share your own memory. Let someone know they're not alone in what they carry. And if you believe more forgotten voices deserve to be heard, subscribe. Because this was just one tale. And many more true Wild West stories are still waiting to rise from the dust. All it takes is someone willing to listen. Someone like you.